So I'm going back sort of about 10 years when I first really heard the name Delia Derbyshire. I think it was on a Stuart Maconie documentary called Inside Out, which I think was actually played at the Doctor Who exhibition down in Cardiff.
Yeah, it was.
So that was like one of those eureka moments for me, connecting the Doctor Who theme with Delia Derbyshire, this lady from Coventry. And I think then by coincidence, when I started my music degree, my tutor in the class, she was obviously moved by Delia Derbyshire, and that's the first time I hear your voice talking about a piece of music. It was Song for Noah, I think it was, which sounds like modern techno. And I think it's like a soundbite you're commenting on. So I'm not sure where that came from exactly, but that's where I sort of linked then my sort of infatuation for Delia Derbyshire when eventually I ended up doing a dissertation about Delia Derbyshire.
Well, I mean, what a journey, Martin. I mean,
I know.
I can actually, if you want, I can play you a little bit of that track. So that Inside Out piece of Stuart Maconie, when was that? That was like 2010. I think I checked it, 2010, and I think I went for the first time to the Doctor Who's exhibition. I think about 2012, and then we were talking about the Doctor Who theme in the classroom, definitely 2013, and that's when it really sort of homed in on me. Yeah, I mean, and then we met in Manchester, I think. Not that long after.
That's right, that. And you played about half an hour audio visual, which just me and Marianne, my partner, we just were like that.
Yeah, well, me too. That's the Stuart Maconie thing. So the archive came to Manchester in 2007. Delia died in 2001, and her partner, Clive Blackburn, he'd been with Delia essentially the last 20 years of her life. And they were living in Northampton.
And ironically, I lived in Northampton from 1990. I lived in Northampton.
Oh, you there?
I lived in Northamptonshire till 2006. So it's very possible I may have bumped into her. It's just, I think, what if?
She. I mean, we might talk about this like later on, but towards the last few years of her life, she started to collaborate with Peter Kember, Sonic Boom. He made contact with her, and she was just starting to do some things again, before she died. But when she passed away, Clive gathered together, all kinds of stuff that that she'd left behind. So a lot of this was paper documents, which was like her scores, and some of that is like conventional notation, and some of it is more graphic scores, images and things where, in some cases, she's maybe the only person who can decipher what those graphics actually mean.
So what was the catalyst of actually saying we need to archive this? Who made the decisions? Obviously you're a big part of it. Who actually sort of said, right, we would like to have this paperwork, the scores, the tapes, archived for posterity? How did that all happen?
So that all that began really thanks to Mark Ayres.
Mark Ayres.
So Mark, people don't know, Mark's a composer, producer, sound designer, and does a lot of the restoration of and remastering of Doctor Who stories on DVD, Blu-ray, but other archive television as well. And when the workshop closed down in the late 1990s, so the Radiophonic Workshop had been running from 1958 right through 40 years on from that. And it was sort of fizzling out in the last few years of its life in the 1990s. It was a bit of a victim of when John Burt was Director General of the BBC and brought in this thing called producer choice, which meant that producers of programmes, rather than having to use the BBC's in-house facilities, like BBC Visual Effects, Costume Department, Radiophonic Workshop, they were then free to outsource and go to competitors who might be able to do it cheaper. And gradually that was sort of like kind of like the writing on the wall really for the workshop, because they couldn't really sort of keep up with that.
Obviously BBC and other channels across the world would use music like something like I write for library music. So literally they have a music supervisor and they pick and choose all this, that, and the other from many different music sync companies these days.
Yeah, actually, you've got that going on. And then of course you've got the technology becoming much more accessible, which is brilliant. But rather than being that, like initially when they were starting out, who could afford a synthesizer in 1969? It's just so it was actually these kind of institutions,
rich people,
well, indeed. I mean, that was the thing, like Peter Zinoviev, like having the money to be able to do that.
Yes,
but then organisations like the BBC who could purchase, and even then, they didn't have a massive budget, like the workshop. So they gradually sort of like got squeezed out, and all the tapes, you're talking about thousands of tapes going back to 1958. And you think of what that is. It's, never mind Doctor Who, it's, all the famous science fiction shows, television drama, David Attenborough, wildlife documentaries like The Living Planet. So many radio stations would have their jingle done by the Radiophonic Workshop. John Peel, would be doing things, like with them. And schools, they'll often tell you the workshop that their biggest client, most people think it was Doctor Who, but their biggest client was BBC Schools Television, Schools Radio. And probably, I don't know, Phil and yourself, Martin, but I mean, as kids, you probably watched, if it wasn't on telly, it'd be like adverts about, the perils of getting frisbees stuck in electricity pylons and things like that.
That's it, yeah.
But that sound, that kind of was just part, like growing up in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah,
well, it was all around you.
Yeah, we didn't realise we were listening to music from the Radiophonic Workshop. We didn't know, did we? As children. Yeah.
No, you just thought that that's the sound of the world, it's putting deep roots down in, our generation and subsequent generations who had that. So anyway, so that's a phenomenal body of work. It's sort of like the soundscape of Britain, basically, of for 40 years, and it was all marked up to be thrown on a skip. And Brian Hodgson and I think Peter Howell, some of the other members of the workshop, got on the phone to Mark Hayes and said, can you come down here? Bring your car down. And to salvage all this stuff. And Mark tells the story that the only reason it wasn't junked was that somebody at the BBC had forgotten to process the actual chit for the skip to take the stuff away. Yeah. So it was as Mark says, it was a typical bit of BBC bureaucratic inefficiency, which actually stopped it.
Saved
it. But
saved the day.
They got the stuff out of there. And this is a long answer to your question, but I mean, it's a great story, because you realise just how close it was to all of that being junked, So Mark started releasing CDs of Radiophonic Workshop. So this was around about 2000, 2001. And they began with Doctor Who, did a few volumes of that. And then they started to slow down the rate of output. And I'd finished my PhD in 2000, which was about music in film. And it's like that second album moment. It's like, what do I do next? And I just, what do I write? And I think of a project to do. And I basically bought those Doctor Who CDs. And essentially I wrote a fan letter to Mark. But in that also said that would it be helpful if the university could provide some sort of support with the cataloguing of the Radiophonic Workshop archive, and maybe we could raise some funds to help with that and so on. And he got back and said, well, the BBC had that in order, and so where that tape library now, that is at the BBC Archive Centre in Perivale. So
this process was started before Delia passed away. It's just that you started the process. Yeah.
That was so Matt had already started that. That was like just with the Radiophonic Workshop, the process of archiving that and cataloguing it and making sure that it was, it was preserved. There are certain people in certain quarters. I've got to be diplomatic what I say. Take the view that once you've digitized the tapes, that's you've got your record. You've got your copy of it posterity. And so you can junk the original master's tapes and free up space. And of course, if you do that to the 1960s stuff of the Radiophonic Workshop, the physical copy of the tape that's where you see where the splices are. And if you don't have that physical copy, you just lose that understanding of how the whole thing was, was constructed. So that, the digital transfer just doesn't tell you enough.
No.
So that's a constant battle, actually, because there is so much pressure on storage space. Anyway, BBC Archive Centre, Perivale. Eventually, that's where the Radiophonic Workshop tape library went. But in his reply, Mark said he'd just been entrusted with a new archive, and would we be interested in helping out with that? And that was Delia's archive. And I don't know what the sound is of a jaw dropping on the floor, but I certainly made that sound. It's just what you just couldn't say no to that.
Is the Pope Catholic?
Yeah, exactly.